It was an ordinary morning in Havenbrook, a small town where time seemed to stand still. The air was crisp, the streets quiet, and the people tired. Tired of promises, tired of struggle, tired of being forgotten. For years, factories had shut down, businesses had vanished, and young people had left, chasing opportunities elsewhere. The heart of the town, once beating with life, now echoed with the silence of empty storefronts. But today, something changed. A black SUV rolled down Main Street, its engine humming against the quiet of the town. No motorcade, no cameras, no grand announcement. The vehicle stopped in front of the only open diner where a handful of locals sipped their morning coffee. The door swung open, and he stepped out. Donald Trump. The few people sitting at the diner windows froze. This had to be a mistake. Why would a former president be here, in a town no one remembered? Trump didn't wait for applause. He didn't head for a podium. He walked straight into the diner, removed his coat, and looked around. Then, in a tone that wasn't rehearsed, wasn't staged, he asked something no one expected. "Who here can tell me what's really going on?" A heavy silence followed. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died. No one knew what to say. Because this wasn't a speech. This wasn't politics. This was a question. A real one. And that's when everything changed. If you were sitting in that diner, what would you tell him? Would you believe a leader who actually listened, or would you doubt his words? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you think this is just another visit, wait until you see what happens next. For a few seconds, no one spoke. People exchanged glances, waiting for someone, anyone, to respond. Was this real? Politicians didn't just walk into places like this, sit down at a local diner, and ask real questions. Finally, a man cleared his throat. "Sir, are you serious?" The voice belonged to Jim Carter, a retired factory worker whose plant had shut down 5 years ago. His arms were rough, hands calloused from decades of hard labor. He had given his life to this town, and it had given him nothing in return. Trump leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Jim scoffed, shaking his head. "All right, you want the truth? Here it is. This town is dying." He gestured out the window. "That used to be a grocery store, closed. That was a factory, gone. That was a school, now it's abandoned." His voice was rising. "They tell us to work harder, but there are no jobs. They tell us to hold on, but there's nothing left to hold on to." A murmur spread through the diner. Heads nodded. Others lowered their eyes. Jim was saying what everyone felt. Trump didn't interrupt. He didn't check his watch. He just listened. Then he did something no one expected. He took out his phone, tapped a number, held it to his ear. "John," he said, "I need a list of every company that left this town in the last 10 years. Find out why they left. Then find out what it'll take to bring them back." He wasn't talking to the media. He was talking to his people, taking action, right there, in real time. The room fell into stunned silence. Jim's hands trembled slightly. What are you doing?" Trump locked eyes with him. "Fixing it." And that's when the town realized this wasn't just another visit. This was different. Now, before we continue, if a leader walked into your town today and asked, "What do you need?" what would you say? Would you believe them? Would you trust them to change things? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you think this is where the story ends, you're mistaken. Because what Trump does next will leave everyone speechless. The diner was silent. The entire room, the entire town, held its breath. Jim's eyes narrowed. "Fixing it," he echoed. Trump didn't hesitate. "Yes." He placed his phone down, his expression firm. "We're bringing jobs back." The disbelief was thick. People had heard promises before. They had heard politicians say the right things. But this wasn't words. This was action. And then something even more unexpected happened. Trump stood up. He walked to the door. And then he stepped outside. For a moment, no one moved. But then, one by one, the people inside the diner followed. The street outside was empty. A cold wind rustled the abandoned storefronts, dust swirling around faded for lease signs. Trump turned around and faced them. Where do we start? No podium, no cameras, no speech, just a leader asking his people. A woman stepped forward. Susan Hart, former school teacher. She had lost her job when the town's only elementary school shut down. Her voice shook as she spoke. If you really want to know, Mr. Trump, start here. She pointed to the school building across the street, windows boarded up, paint peeling, a graveyard of what once was. Start with our kids. A ripple went through the crowd. Some murmured in agreement. Others stayed silent, afraid to believe. Trump studied the building, nodded. Then he picked up his phone. Again. John, I want numbers on what it takes to reopen a school. I want reports on funding, on resources, on teachers. Give me options and I want them now. He turned back to Susan. You're right, it starts here. The crowd wasn't sure what to think. Was this real? Would this actually happen? And then Jim spoke again. Words are easy, sir. We've heard them before. Trump's gaze didn't waver. That's why I'm not giving you words. Then what are you giving us? Trump smirked. Results. The crowd stared. Some whispered. Others shook their heads, not daring to hope. But deep down, something had shifted. This wasn't a campaign. This wasn't a speech. This was different. Do you believe in second chances for forgotten towns? Do you think one person can truly change things? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because what happens next will shake this town to its core. The town stood still. No one knew what to say. Promises had been made before. Officials had come, given speeches, shaken hands, then disappeared. Would this be the same? Jim Carter crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. All right, Mr. Trump, let's be real. You're saying all the right things, but how do we know you won't forget about us the second you leave? A murmur spread through the crowd. It was the question on everyone's mind. Trump didn't flinch. He turned and looked every person in the eye. Then he took a deep breath and spoke. Slowly, firmly. Because I'm not leaving until we have a plan. Silence. And because you won't let me forget. Jim squinted. What does that mean? Trump pulled his phone out, held it up for everyone to see. You have my number. A ripple of confusion. People exchanged looks. Was he serious? Trump continued. I'll say it again. If I don't keep my word, you remind me. If things don't change, you hold me accountable. The air was thick with disbelief. No one expected this. Susan Hart, the former teacher, took a step forward. Do you mean that? Trump nodded. I don't say things I don't mean. The people in the crowd, people who had spent years being ignored, looked at one another. Some were still skeptical. Some were starting to believe. And then Jim did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his old flip phone, and muttered, "Give me the damn number." Trump smirked. Now we're getting somewhere. The town wasn't cheering. They weren't celebrating. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, they were paying attention. Now, before we continue, if you had one call to make to someone in power, what would you say? What would you fight for? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because what Trump does next will change everything. The air in Havenbrook felt different. Jim Carter stared at the number saved in his phone. He still wasn't sure if he believed this, but he wanted to. Trump wasn't making empty promises. He was making himself accountable. The former president looked around. All right, he said, voice steady. Let's make something clear. This isn't about me. This is about you. You tell me what's broken, and we fix it together. No cameras, no reporters, no rehearsed speech. For the first time in years, someone was listening. A young man in the crowd. Ethan, a college graduate who had been forced to move back home after failing to find work, spoke up. All right, Mr. Trump, we lost everything when the steel plant shut down. Can you fix that? Trump nodded. I already made the call. We're working on it. Susan crossed her arms. And our school? Trump turned to her. By next week, you'll have a report on exactly what it takes to reopen it. Jim took a step forward. And if you don't follow through, Trump smirked, then I hope your phone battery is charged because I expect you to remind me. A ripple of laughter, not forced, not fake. For the first time, people felt heard. Then Trump did something that shocked them even more. He pulled out his notebook. All right, he said, flipping to a blank page. Tell me everything else that needs fixing. The crowd froze. No one had ever asked them that before. Then, one by one, they spoke. The diner owner talked about rising costs that were suffocating small businesses. A farmer described how regulations had nearly put him out of work. A mother shared how she had to drive 2 hours just to get her sick child to a hospital. And Trump? He wrote it all down. No speeches, no dodging, just listening. What's one thing you would put on that list if someone in power actually listened? Drop it in the comments below. Because what happens next, it proves this visit wasn't just talk. The people of Havenbrook had been let down before. They had seen politicians come and go, making big promises and leaving just as quickly. But this time, it felt different. Trump stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by people who had lost faith in leadership. Yet, for the first time in years, they weren't just listening, they were speaking, and he was writing it all down. Factories, schools, small businesses, healthcare. One by one, problems were listed. One by one, Trump took notes. No reporters, no teleprompters, just solutions. Then he made a final move that left everyone speechless. He turned to Jim, the retired factory worker who had been the most skeptical from the start. Jim, Trump said, handing him his notebook. This isn't just my list now, it's yours too. Jim hesitated. What does that mean? It means you don't let me forget. Trump's voice was steady. You hold me accountable. If nothing changes, you call me. If anyone ignores this, you remind them. The crowd stared. This wasn't how things worked. Leaders didn't hand power back to the people. Jim swallowed. His hands trembled slightly as he took the notebook. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought was long gone. Hope. Trump put his phone away. No grand farewell. No security rushing him out. Just a man standing in front of the people, looking them in the eyes. This town doesn't die on my watch, he said. And if I fail, you better remind me. The people watched him go. No parade, no celebration. But as he drove away, Jim did something that surprised even himself. He opened the notebook, and he turned to the first page. Because this time things were different. Before you go, if you had Trump's notebook in your hands, what's the first thing you'd write down? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you think more leaders should listen instead of just talking, hit like, share this story, and let's make sure no town is ever forgotten again. Thank you for watching. Now tell us, what needs to change in your town?